Welcome to the Mind Cuts series.
Great to be here.
Today, we're diving deep, really deep, into our mental well-being. It's something we all think about, right?
Absolutely. It touches everyone.
And we've looked at a bunch of sources you sent in to tackle some big questions, like, is being depressed always a brain issue? Or, can life just be genuinely tough sometimes?
Yeah, that's a fundamental one.
How do we even know the difference between just feeling sad and, a real mental illness?
Tricky distinction sometimes.
And what about all the myths out there? We want to get to more accurate ways of thinking about this stuff.
Definitely need to clear up some common misunderstandings.
We'll also explore how things like our genes, our environment, even societal pressures kind of mix together.
The whole nature versus nurture thing, but it's usually both.
And what about those big labels like narcissism or sociopathy? Are people stuck with those forever?
Or is change possible? We'll get into that.
So our mission here is to pull out the key insights, challenge some assumptions, and give you, our listener, a clearer, more nuanced picture of what's going on inside our heads.
Okay, so let's jump in with that first big question. The one about feeling depressed. Is it the brain or is it life circumstances?
Right. Am I depressed because my brain's messed up or because my life genuinely sucks? That's putting it bluntly, but yeah.
It really gets to the heart of it. And clinically, a key differentiator we look at is something called impairment of function.
Impairment of function. Okay.
Yeah.
So not just feeling awful, but how it stops you from doing things.
Exactly. Can you actually get out of bed, manage basic hygiene? Can you fulfill your duties like work or school or family responsibilities? If you're feeling down, but you're still, managing those things, it leans more towards sadness.
Okay.
But the really concerning part is, many people live with impairing conditions and don't even realize it. It's just become their normal.
Like what? Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about a kid with undiagnosed ADHD struggling in school. They might just internalize it as, I'm lazy or I'm not smart. They don't know their brain literally works differently. Or an adult with OCD who just thinks they're, quirky or overly meticulous.
Wow.
Yeah.
Living with something significant and just adapting to it as normal.
Yeah.
So how do you get past someone just saying, I feel depressed, to figure out if it's this impairing condition?
Right. We use tools, validated instruments, basically carefully designed
Questionnaires.
Yeah, but they've been studied extensively. You give them to lots of people reporting depressive feelings, evaluate them clinically, and you start seeing patterns. These patterns help us separate everyday sadness from clinically significant depression that's really impacting function.
So the questionnaires pick up on specific things. What kind of things?
Yeah, they highlight specific features. Two really significant ones that often point towards clinical depression are early morning awakening.
Waking up super early and can't get back to sleep.
Exactly. Way before you intend to. And the other is anhedonia.
Anhedonia. That's the one where nothing feels good anymore.
Precisely. Things you used to love, food, hobbies, seeing friends, they just lose their appeal. It's like the pleasure circuits in the brain are dimmed or switched off.
Yeah, that paints a clearer picture. But what about the flip side? With all the mental health talk online, like on TikTok,
Yeah.
is there a risk people start diagnosing themselves with everything, over-identifying?
Huge concern, absolutely. There was actually a study, I think it found something like 95% of TikTok videos about ADHD had misinformation.
95%. Wow.
Yeah. So what happens is someone maybe struggles to focus sometimes, which happens to everyone, right?
Totally.
They see it listed as an ADHD symptom and they think, oh, I do that. I must have ADHD. It's this sort of reverse logic. It skips the crucial step of considering all the other reasons someone might be distractible.
Right, like lack of sleep, stress, boredom.
Exactly. Just because you have one symptom doesn't mean you have the whole disorder. That's where professional assessment comes in.
How do doctors avoid that trap then? Jumping to conclusions.
It's a process called differential diagnosis. When someone comes in with symptoms, you don't just grab the first diagnosis that fits a little. You systematically think through all the possibilities.
Okay.
Like the losing keys example. Sure, someone with ADHD might lose their keys a lot, but what's the probability that just losing keys means you have ADHD? Pretty low, actually. Most people misplace things. The internet often misses that crucial piece, probability, context, ruling other things out.
Got it. Differential diagnosis. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Nature versus nurture. Genes versus environment in mental illness. What's the balance?
Yeah, the age-old question. It's almost never just one or the other. Think of genes as providing a predisposition or maybe a vulnerability.
So, like, you might be more susceptible.
Exactly. But having the genetic loading doesn't guarantee you'll develop the illness. The environment often plays a huge role as the trigger.
Can you give an analogy?
Sure, allergies are a good one. You might have the genetic tendency towards, say, a pollen allergy. But if you live somewhere with no pollen, you'll never actually get the allergy symptoms right.
Right. No trigger, no reaction.
Same idea with many mental illnesses. Someone could carry genes linked to bipolar disorder, but it might take a major life stressor, a significant environmental trigger, to actually kick off that first manic episode.
What kind of triggers?
It varies hugely. But interestingly, for women with that genetic vulnerability, pregnancy and childbirth are known potential triggers for a first manic episode.
Well, that really shows the interaction. Can managing the environment help control a predisposition?
Absolutely. I knew a case, a very successful PhD researcher diagnosed with bipolar disorder. They found that being incredibly meticulous about their sleep schedule was the key.
Sleepery.
Yeah, strict sleep hygiene, consistent schedule. It was crucial for preventing manic episodes, even helped reduce reliance on medication. It's a perfect example of managing the environmental factor sleep, in this case, to control the expression of the genetic predisposition.
That's fascinating. It leads to another question, though. Are mental illness symptoms always purely biological? Or can other things be going on? Maybe subconscious stuff?
That's a really complex area, and honestly, chances are, in many cases, it's kind of both.
Both biological and something else.
Yeah, take, for example, something called psychogenic non-epileptiform seizures, or PNES. People experiencing these can look exactly like they're having an epileptic seizure-shaking loss of consciousness.
But it's not epilepsy.
No abnormal electrical activity in the brain, which is the hallmark of epilepsy. It's believed these physical symptoms are produced subconsciously, often linked to underlying psychological distress or trauma.
Wow. The mind literally creating physical seizure symptoms.
It seems so. And what's really wild is that about 50% of people with PNES also have actual epileptic seizures, so the body's response can be incredibly layered and complex.
Mind blown. Okay, so what about the sick role? Does adopting that identity ever play a part?
That's definitely a factor to consider. When someone is seen as sick, they often get certain, well, benefits, you could say. Excused responsibilities, more care and compassion from others.
White people cut you some slack.
Exactly. And over time, even if there's a very real underlying biological condition, these secondary gains, as they're sometimes called, can subconsciously reinforce the symptoms or make it harder to let go of them. It doesn't mean the illness isn't real, but the psychological and social aspects can kind of maintain it.
Yeah, and that must make things tough for doctors. Like if a depressed patient keeps missing appointments, how do you tell if it's the depression making it impossible or something else related to that sick role dynamic?
It requires careful clinical judgment. You have to look at the whole picture, the patient's history, the pattern, other behaviors. There's no easy answer, honestly. It highlights why understanding the person holistically is so important.
Yeah, definitely complex. Okay, let's switch focus again. Personality. Specifically narcissism. That word gets thrown around a lot.
It really does. And my take might be a bit different from the pop psychology version. I tend to think that underneath the outward presentation, many individuals with strong narcissistic traits are actually grappling with deep insecurity.
Insecurity, not arrogance.
Well, the arrogance is often the shield. The core issue, I think, is a profound dependence on external validation. Their self-worth isn't internal. It relies heavily on the esteem of others.
So it's different from just being confident.
Yeah.
Or having a healthy ego.
Totally different. Confidence ideally comes from within, from competence, from a stable sense of self. Ego is more the outward projection. Narcissism, in this view, involves this fragile self-esteem that needs constant propping up from outside. That's why a key feature is often an extreme intolerance of criticism.
Because criticism feels like an attack on their very being.
Exactly. If your self-worth is built on others' admiration, any negative feedback feels catastrophic. It threatens the whole structure.
So it's not just like having an off day and feeling insecure. It's a persistent pattern of needing that external validation.
Precisely. It's that fundamental reliance. Someone truly confident can handle criticism, learn from it even. Their sense of self isn't shattered by disagreement.
That's a really helpful way to frame it. Makes more sense than just they're arrogant. Okay, what about sociopathy? Another heavy label.
Yeah, or antisocial personality disorder. in clinical terms. And again, my perspective might be a bit unconventional. It's actually kind of interesting that psychiatrists, as a group, tend to score relatively high on certain sociopathy scales.
Wait, really? Psychiatrists? Why?
Think about the job. You're constantly dealing with intense human suffering, making difficult decisions, sometimes needing to maintain emotional distance to remain objective and effective. A core trait often linked to sociopathy is reduced affective empathy, feeling what others feel.
So that detachment needed for the job can look like a sociopathic trait on a test.
It can register that way. It highlights a crucial point. Lacking strong empathy doesn't automatically equal being malicious or evil.
That's important.
Yeah.
Because the stereotype is, well, criminals.
Right. And that stereotype comes partly from the fact that a lot of research historically focused on prison populations. You're studying the unsuccessful sociopath, the ones who got caught.
Ah, so there could be successful ones out there.
Potentially. Think about a CEO who has to make a tough call, like laying off hundreds of people for the company's survival. That requires a certain level of emotional detachment, right? Doesn't necessarily mean they enjoy it or are a bad person. I've known people who might score high on these traits who are fundamentally decent people trying to do good. They might just have to work harder consciously to consider others' feelings because the automatic empathic response isn't as strong.
Okay, so both narcissism and sociopathy seem more nuanced than the common perception. Does that mean they're solvable? Can people change?
I'm actually quite optimistic here. I believe many mental health challenges, including aspects of narcissism, maybe even personality disorders like borderline personality disorder, are far more solvable than people often think.
Really? Even things that seem so ingrained?
Yeah. I like the analogy of a relationship problem, like having a flat tire on a road trip. It's a problem, sure, but it's fixable if both people are willing to put in the work to change the tire. A diagnosis shouldn't be seen as a life sentence defining someone's entire future.
That's a much more hopeful outlook. It pushes back against that idea of these being permanent states.
Exactly. And even with sociopathy, while cure might not be the right word, people can learn adaptive strategies. And honestly, sometimes having someone with certain sociopathic traits on your side, well, they can be incredibly loyal and fiercely protective of their in-group. Vicious towards external threats, maybe, but loyal.
Interesting. A potential upside, in a way.
Yeah.
But switching back to the dangers. Self-diagnosis from the internet.
Yeah.
Especially for something like psychopathy. Bad idea.
Oh, definitely a bad idea. Please, nobody try to diagnose themselves or others with psychopathy based on a few online articles. The internet completely misses that crucial element we talked about, probability.
Right. The differential diagnosis thing again.
Exactly. You might read a list of traits and think, oh, I know someone who does that, or I sometimes feel that way. But having a few traits doesn't mean you meet the threshold for a complex disorder. It lacks the clinical judgment, the context, the ruling out of other explanations.
Like the keys example, losing keys doesn't equal ADHD.
Precisely. The probability is low. Self-diagnosis often ignores that.
Okay. So this leads to a big listener question. Why does it feel like medication is always the first answer in the system?
Yeah.
You go in feeling anxious or depressed, and boom, prescription.
Yeah, that's a really common frustration, and it's complicated. Part of it, frankly, is financial incentives within the healthcare system.
How so?
Well, insurance reimbursement models can sometimes favor shorter medication management appointments over longer, more time-intensive therapy sessions. It can be, unfortunately, more efficient financially for practices sometimes.
So the system itself kind of nudges things towards meds.
It can, yeah. But it's not just the system. Patients play a role, too. Let's be honest, the work involved in therapy and making real behavioral changes. That's hard. It takes effort and commitment. Taking a pill can feel easier, more convenient.
The path of least resistance.
Sometimes, yes. Plus, think about where research funding goes. There's huge investment in drug development, which naturally influences treatment focus. And fundamentally, our system is mostly sick care, treating problems after they arise, not well care focused on prevention.
Sick care versus well care. That's a good distinction. It sounds like a system with a lot of tangled incentives.
Very tangled. You have patients, doctors, insurance companies, employers, often with conflicting financial goals. There was this historical thing in ancient China where doctors were paid to keep people healthy and payments stopped if they got sick. Imagine that incentive structure today.
Totally different. So is there a better way to think about mental health beyond just treating diagnosed illnesses?
I think so. There's growing interest in transdiagnostic factors. These are underlying traits or processes that cut across different diagnoses. Things like perfectionism, rumination, intolerance of uncertainty, maybe a lack of purpose.
So things that make you vulnerable to lots of different problems.
Exactly. And the idea is if you can target and improve these core underlying factors, you might get broader benefits across various potential mental health issues. For instance, research links a sense of meaninglessness pretty strongly with things like pornography addiction. So, working on finding meaning might help with that, but also potentially with depression or anxiety.
Tackling the roots, not just the branches.
That's the idea, and it ties into why people get so frustrated with healthcare generally, right? You go to buy a car, you expect price transparency, choices. Healthcare often feels opaque, confusing. Like that crazy ambulance bill story someone shared. Why does it cost that much?
Yeah, no kidding. It feels broken.
It has deep historical roots, like the employer-based insurance system, starting during WWII wage controls. And you get these perverse incentives. I heard about an investment firm looking to fund healthcare companies that provide the absolute minimum care possible to maximize profit. It's concerning.
Yikes. That's not good.
Not good at all. So while fixing the whole system is a massive challenge, empowering individuals with knowledge about their own minds, their own tendencies, that feels like a crucial step people can take.
Bringing it back to the individual and back to that depression question.
Yeah.
You mentioned 2 types.
Right. It's helpful to think of pathologic depression, the illness, the brain chemistry aspect, often meeting biological treatment like meds, and congruent depression.
Congruent depression.
Yeah. Depression, that's a congruent, understandable response to genuinely difficult life circumstances. Loss, failure, hardship. Your life is objectively hard and you feel depressed as a result. These 2 types likely need very different solutions. Putting someone on an antidepressant when their core issue is, say, crushing debt or a toxic job might numb the pain, but doesn't solve the problem.
That distinction seems absolutely critical. Pathologic versus congruent.
Yeah.
Okay. What about ways we shoot ourselves in the foot? Self-sabotage.
Oh, a big one is what I sometimes call giving in to yourself in unhelpful ways. It often comes from a place of wanting comfort or avoiding pain, but backfires.
Like what?
I had a patient once, terrible trauma related to an engagement ending badly. Understandably, they wanted to avoid anything related to weddings, relationships, dating, but that constant avoidance, while feeling safer in the short term, kept the fear alive and prevented them from moving forward, from healing. Giving into the avoidance became the sabotage.
Avoiding the discomfort actually reinforces the problem.
Got it.
Okay. Let's zoom out again. Personality. You broke it down earlier. Perception, reaction, behavior. Can we really change those?
Absolutely. Think about perception, how we take in information. That's often colored by our past experiences, our emotional baggage.
Right.
We can learn to identify cognitive biases, challenge assumptions, see things more clearly.
Okay, change perception.
Then reaction, our internal thoughts and feelings. We can change those through things like cognitive reframing, looking at situations differently, mindfulness, relaxation techniques, shifting our internal response.
And behavior.
And behavior, yes. That's often the most direct thing we can change. We can consciously choose to act differently, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. Do the opposite of the avoidance, for example. So yes, perception, reaction, behavior, all 3 are malleable. Personality isn't set in stone.
It's empowering. What about emotions then? Are they the problem? Do we try to control them, suppress them?
No, emotions themselves aren't the problem. They're vital information. They evolved for a reason. Think of them as signals. Fear signals danger, anger signals boundary violation, sadness signals loss. Even depression, as we touched on, can be a signal, maybe a motivation towards inaction when action feels futile, an energy saver.
So emotions are data.
Exactly. Data and motivation. Love motivates connection, but can suppress risk assessment, right? The goal isn't to eliminate emotions that would be like driving without a dashboard. The goal is to understand them, regulate them, choose how we respond to them, control the response, not necessarily the initial feeling.
Regulate, not eliminate.
Yep.
Okay, what about things like Myers-Briggs? People love those personality tests. Are they useful?
Myers-Briggs. It has interesting roots in Carl Jung's ideas, some connections to Eastern thought, but scientifically, it lacks strong, independent validation. A lot of the supportive research comes from the organization that sells it.
So take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. It can be fun for self-reflection, maybe sparking conversation, but relying on it as a definitive description of who you are or for predicting job success, the evidence just isn't there. Understanding the underlying mechanisms, perception, reaction, behavior is probably more useful.
Makes sense. What about AI? Everyone's talking about AI. Can it help with mental health?
Yeah.
Diagnosis? therapy?
I tend to think of AI right now as like a super advanced journal. You put information in, it processes it based on patterns it's learned and gives you output. The quality depends entirely on the input and its training data.
So garbage in, garbage out.
Potentially, yes. It might be good at tracking patterns, paying attention in a way, but does it understand context? Nuance, probability, the lived human experience? Not really, not yet. Can it provide genuine empathy? No. I wouldn't rely on it for accurate diagnosis or therapy.
So a tool, maybe, but not a replacement for a human professional.
Exactly. I actually tried using ChatGPT for some research on meditation once, just curious, and it gave me some inaccurate information. So definitely needs human oversight and critical evaluation.
Good to know. Okay, shifting to a bigger picture, societal level, is there one really destructive habit you see today that we might be ignoring?
Ooh, that's a big question. If I had to pick one, I think it's the growing trend of making other people responsible for our feelings.
How do you mean?
This constant focus on being offended, on avoiding triggers, demanding that others change their language or behavior so we don't feel uncomfortable. There's a difference between being genuinely harmed and simply being offended or having our views challenged.
And constantly avoiding offense is bad how?
Because regulating our own emotional responses is a skill. And like any skill, it strengthens with practice and weakens without it. By constantly trying to curate the external world to avoid any potential upset, we're basically letting our own internal emotional regulation muscles atrophy. We become more fragile, less resilient.
Wow. That's a powerful perspective. We're outsourcing our emotional regulation.
In a way, yes. And it can hinder genuine dialogue and understanding, too.
Okay. Thinking about development, can our choices, our experiences actually cause permanent damage to our mental development, like, say, heavy drug use as a teen or severe trauma?
Permanent is a strong word. Certainly, some things can make the path harder. Teenage brains are still developing, so yeah, heavy substance use during that time isn't ideal. It can affect development. Severe trauma absolutely leaves scars, but is the damage irreversible? Can people heal and grow? Mostly, I believe, yes.
So recovery is possible, even if it's hard.
Yes. Now, defining fully healed is complex. If someone endures horrific abuse, are they ever the exact same person they might have been without it? Probably not. Does that mean they can't find happiness, meaning build good lives? Absolutely they can. The capacity for resilience is remarkable.
That's hopeful. On a lighter note, any quick tricks for finding a bit of inner peace when things feel overwhelming?
One simple but effective one is to go meta.
Go meta, like metacognition. Thinking about thinking.
Exactly. Create distance. Instead of being in the swirling thought like I'm a loser, just notice it, label it. My mind is having the thought that I am a loser. Just observing it, not fusing with it.
So label the thought instead of being the thought.
Right. It creates a space. And remember, peace doesn't always mean the problem is solved. Sometimes peace is just learning to tolerate the discomfort, the lack of resolution, without getting swept away by it.
Tolerating uncertainty.
Yep.
What about willpower? Some people seem to have tons, others not so much. Why?
Multiple factors. There's likely a genetic component, differences in brain areas like the frontal lobes, but willpower is also like a muscle, or maybe more accurately, like a battery. It gets depleted with use throughout the day.
Depleted? How?
Every time you resist an impulse, make a decision, force yourself to focus. It uses a bit of that battery. Think of all the little choices, the notifications you ignore, the temptation you resist. It adds up, like closing endless pop-up ads.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So how do you conserve willpower?
Habits. Rely on routines. Automate as much as you can. Brushing your teeth doesn't take willpower anymore, right? It's automatic. The more you can automate, the more willpower you save for when you really need it.
Habits save willpower.
Got it.
Let's talk happiness. What is it really?
From a sort of experiential or even meditative perspective, happiness can be seen as one-pointed consciousness, complete absorption in the present. The mind isn't wandering, regretting, worrying. It's just here, fully engaged.
So the absence of mental chatter.
Pretty much. Unhappiness, conversely, is often the presence of all that mental activity, the doubts, the regrets, the planning, the judging, rumination, a restless mind. So happiness isn't necessarily excitement. It's more like stillness, mental quiet.
And that can be cultivated.
Yes.
Yeah.
By practicing bringing the mind to that one point of focus. The trap is trying to get there, using external things, buying stuff, playing video games, seeking constant novelty. That can create temporary focus, sure, but it leads to dependence, addiction. You need the external thing to feel okay.
Right. And society kind of pushes that, doesn't it? Buy this, achieve that, then you'll be happy.
Absolutely. Advertising often works by making you feel slightly unhappy or inadequate, then offering the product as the solution to evoke that temporary one-pointedness. It's a cycle. True sustainable happiness comes from cultivating it internally.
Internal cultivation. Okay. But what about long-term goals? Why do some people sacrifice present joy for something way down the line?
Sometimes it's genuinely because the process itself is engaging, aligned with their values, but other times, that pursuit of long-term goals can actually be driven by anxiety, fear of the future, fear of not measuring up. They're running away from discomfort rather than running towards genuine fulfillment.
So the sacrifice isn't always noble. It could be fear-based.
It can be. There's this sort of societal scam almost that you must suffer and sacrifice now for future success and happiness, and sometimes that just leads to burnout, neglecting relationships, missing life along the way. Now the flip side is also true. Sometimes people use hard work doesn't guarantee happiness as an excuse not to try. It's a balance.
Finding joy in the journey, not just hoping for the destination. Okay, relationships again. What makes a relationship good or healthy?
I like the idea of self-expansion. In a good relationship, your sense of self should feel like it's growing, expanding. You're learning new things, having new experiences through the relationship. Your partner becomes part of your world, and you feel like you're leveling up as a person because of it.
Self-expansion, I like that. Leveling up, how does that work?
Psychologically, a close partner can literally become integrated into your cognitive representation of yourself. Their perspectives, resources, identities start to feel partly like your own. It broadens you.
What about toxicity? Why is it sometimes hard to see?
Often because what feels normal is based on past experiences. If you grew up with chaotic or abusive dynamics, a relationship with similar patterns might feel familiar, even comfortable in a strange way, making it harder to recognize the red flags.
Familiarity breeding, tolerance for bad behavior.
Something like that, yeah. And that might tie into the bad boy thing, too.
Ah, yes, the attraction to bad boys or bad girls. Why does that happen?
Could be many things. Maybe a perception of high status, confidence, even if it's brittle narcissism. Maybe a subconscious belief that someone too nice must be boring or have something wrong with them. Or maybe it ties back to those familiar, if unhealthy, childhood dynamics.
Complex motivations. So what are some clear signs someone is a good potential partner?
Look at how they handle adversity. Do they crumble, blame, lash out, or do they face challenges constructively? Also, crucially, do they take your thoughts and feelings seriously? Can you have disagreements respectfully?
Respectful disagreement. Key. Any red flags?
Consistent disrespect towards others, especially those they perceive as lower status, a strong sense of entitlement, unwillingness to apologize or learn from mistakes, basically signs they aren't willing or able to grow.
Got it. What about finding the one, the soulmate? What's the biggest hurdle?
Honestly, I think the biggest hurdle is having a rigid mental checklist, an impression of exactly what your soulmate should be like.
The checklist gets in the way.
Totally. A soul connection, if you believe in such a thing, is felt on a deeper level, right? Beyond the superficial criteria like job, height, hobbies, if you're too busy checking boxes during a date, you're not present. You can't feel that deeper resonance, even if it's there. You miss the connection because you're stuck in your head.
So be present, feel the connection, ditch the checklist. But what is a soul connection scientifically?
That's the million-dollar question. It's hard to quantify because it arguably exists beyond the purely physical, measurable dimension. You have the physical reality, sure, but then you have this other layer, thoughts, emotions, consciousness. It's potent, it drives behavior, but it's hard to pin down with instruments. A soulmate connection, perhaps, is a deep resonance on that non-physical level.
A resonance beyond the physical. I like that. Okay, practical dating advice. How do you design a meaningful first date, scientifically speaking?
Well, perfect is tough, but you can definitely structure a date to increase the likelihood of connection. The key seems to be shared emotional experiences.
Not just coffee and questions.
Coffee dates often feel like job interviews. Too much cognitive evaluation, not enough shared feeling. Think about activities that evoke some emotion. Maybe something slightly thrilling like a haunted house, or funny like improv comedy, or collaborative like an escape room. Even mild conflict or challenge navigated together can build connection faster than just exchanging facts.
Shared emotional experience.
Okay.
Have you ever had that soulmate feeling, that instant connection?
I have, actually, with my wife. The first time I saw her, it was intense, inexplicable, just this feeling of recognition, like, oh, there you are. It wasn't logical, didn't make sense, but it was undeniable. So based on that N of 1, I lean towards believing in it.
Wow. So it wasn't falling in love over time, it was instant.
That feeling was instant falling in love, building the relationship. That took time, of course. There's also something called limerence, which is more like obsessive infatuation, different from that deep recognition.
Interesting distinction. Okay, let's pivot to success. Entrepreneurs, why do some succeed wildly? Is it just being smart?
Intelligence helps, sure, but it's often more about things like delaying gratification, understanding complex systems, seeing opportunities others miss, resilience, and, crucially, offering something valuable that people actually need or want.
But we hear about successful entrepreneurs being unhappy. You touched on this. Why?
Often it's that trap again. Believing happiness is the result of achieving the goal. I'll be happy when I sell the company, make X amount, reach Y status. But happiness, as we discussed, is more about the state of mind, the quieting of mental chatter. You can achieve massive external success and still have a noisy, unhappy mind if you haven't cultivated inner peace.
The Buddha story again. Had everything, still wasn't content.
Exactly. Material success doesn't automatically fix the internal landscape.
What are some common problems you see among very wealthy people?
It sounds counterintuitive, but things like intense loneliness, difficulty trusting people's motives, are they friends with me, or my money, a disconnect from the everyday struggles most people face, sometimes neglecting relationships in the pursuit of wealth, and paradoxically, sometimes a feeling of being out of control despite having immense resources, because managing wealth brings its own complex stressors.
Loneliness at the top.
Yeah.
Okay, what about gamifying life? Optimizing everything. Is that the path?
It can be useful up to a point, tracking habits, setting goals, optimizing health. That can lead to improvements. But it can also become an obsession, a new source of anxiety, always needing to optimize, always chasing the next level. It can become driven by a kind of greed or dissatisfaction rather than genuine well-being. You can hit a plateau where the optimization itself becomes the stressor.
The optimizer's paradox.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you know if someone is actually ready to change or if they're just talking about it?
In therapy, we talk about motivational interviewing. You listen for the type of talk. Is it sustained talk, reasons not to change, defending the status quo? Or is it change talk, expressing desire, ability, reasons, need for change, maybe even taking small steps?
Sustained talk versus change talk.
Right. Someone deep in sustained talk probably isn't ready yet. Someone showing more change talk is moving in that direction. And there are techniques to help gently guide someone from sustained talk towards change talk, but ultimately the motivation has to come from within.
Makes sense. Briefly, anything surprising about being a business owner yourself?
Maybe the ethical weight of some decisions. Opportunities come along that are financially tempting but don't align with your core values, your North Star. Navigating that, staying true to something beyond just profit, can be unexpectedly challenging.
Maintaining the North Star. Okay, what about midlife crises? Are they real? How do you navigate finding meaning later in life?
I tend to reframe midlife crisis as a developmentally normal period of reevaluation. Your priorities shift, questions about meaning surface. It's not necessarily a crisis, more like a significant transition point.
A transition, not a crisis. How did you navigate that yourself?
For me, it involved reconnecting with spiritual practices, delving deeper into that fourth dimension beyond just the physical, emotional, and mental. Finding practices that cultivated inner stillness and a sense of purpose beyond the day-to-day grind was crucial for finding direction.
The fourth dimension. Interesting. So looking back over your career, how has your perspective on mental health changed the most?
Two big things stand out. First, realizing just how solvable many mental health issues are, much more so than I initially thought or than society often portrays. The potential for change is huge.
More solvable than we think. And
Right.
the
Second, moving beyond just getting people from, say, -5 back to 0, back to baseline, realizing we have tools and techniques, psychological, spiritual, lifestyle, to help people move from 0 to +5 to actually thriving, flourishing. That's become a major focus.
From baseline to thriving, that's a great goal.
Yeah, it's why I've put effort into creating comprehensive guides and resources on these topics, trying to share that in-depth knowledge to empower people on that journey.
Fantastic. Well, this has been incredibly insightful. To quickly recap for everyone listening, we've covered the difference between sadness and depression, the mix of nature and nurture, the complexities of personality like narcissism, the potential for change, the pitfalls of online info, issues in healthcare, tackling root causes, self-sabotage, how personality works, the role of emotions.
And happiness, relationship, success.
Exactly. The nature of happiness, finding good partners, why success doesn't always equal contentment, It's a lot, but hopefully really valuable.
Hope so.
So, a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given all the noise, all the external pressures we face, how can you carve out more time and space just to understand your own internal world, to cultivate that well-being that comes from within, not from outside approval?
Or maybe thinking about genes and environment. What's one small, concrete change you could make in your daily life, starting today, to actively support your own mental and emotional health?
Great questions. It's an ongoing journey, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining us on the MindCat series. Keep exploring, stay curious.
Thanks for having me.